Okay.
Okay, we are live and you are all set to start, Counselor Blanks.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's public safety meeting. Today's date is Wednesday, May 5th, and the time is about 6:35. I would just kind of acknowledge everybody who's around the virtual table right now. Let's see, Counselor Chris Williams, Chief Vernon Riddick, Chief Greg Priest, and the Assistant Chiefs, um, Assistant Chief Tara, Counselor Gold, Town Manager Matt Hart, and this gentleman down in my lower corner, I don't recognize, and let me see. Oh, there you are. Mr. Hungerford.
Yes, good evening. I'm the dispatch supervisor, ERC manager.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And Assistant Chief Mike Siniscali and Deputy Mayor Davidoff will be joining us in a few. And did I leave anybody out? Okay. All right. The meeting minutes for May 5th is on the agenda and posted on the board docs. I hope everybody had a chance to review those minutes, and if there were any corrections or something that wasn't included, please let Mr. Hart or Gerida know so we can make those corrections. Okay. The next order of agenda items is our fire department efficiency and effectiveness study. I know we're all anxious to learn about this study, and so I'm going to ask Mr. Hart to kick us off.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining tonight's meeting. As the chair said, we're looking forward to tonight's presentation. Recall last time we met, we talked about the schedule we would use to walk you through the efficiency and effectiveness study, which was conducted by Fitch a couple of years ago. But we want to provide some very important updates on the work we've done since we received that study. We think the study is still relevant today because there are some key decisions that council will need to make either this term or next term regarding ALS deployment and potentially future building projects as well. So those are a couple of key reasons why we wanted to review this with you again. And we also felt like we didn't really have time to review it with you in as thorough a manner as we had hoped. Recall we were beginning to work through it, and then the pandemic hit, as well as other events that we had to focus time and attention to. So we wanted to get back to this. So we have broken it down into a series of conversations over the next couple of months. For your reference, we did attach links to the report so that you can have them for the future. The bulk of the information is in what's called the executive summary. There's also a useful appendix as well. And tonight we plan to, the chief's going to focus on an overview of our emergency medical system, talk about dispatch and emergency medical dispatch. That's why one of the reasons why we have Mr. Hungerford with us this evening, talking a little bit about system design for emergency medical services as well. And then getting into fire and our EMS deployment. So those are kind of the main points we want to cover this evening. And I'll pause there, Madam Chair, and I think you can next recognize Chief Priest to lead us through the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Okay, I will turn it over to you, Chief Priest and team.
Thank you very much, Councilwoman Blanks. It's nice to be here this evening. Thank you, Mr. Hart, for the introduction. I'm getting ready to share my screen with a PowerPoint presentation, and Gerida will walk me through making sure that I have the right view up there for everyone. It's going to take about few seconds for us to swap the screen over. Jarida, if you could let me know when it appears like we are.
No, Chief Priest, I can see your next slide.
Okay, just going to give it a second.
Sure thing. All set.
Okay, outstanding. All right, so this evening we're going to walk through a little bit of a path for the Fitch study. Town Manager Hart's done a very nice job of laying out kind of some of the broad strokes for where we're headed. A little bit more granular is tonight we are really trying to develop a framework and a context and a foundation for the Public Safety Committee as we go through this review. Obviously, there will be times where recommendations are needed. So we're trying to build a frame for you this evening. I will discuss some of the limitations to the Fitch study, but importantly, we'll take and discuss some of the key takeaways that Fitch has provided to us. And as part of that, their recommendations that they've made for the town of West Hartford. We'll also discuss some of the progress and the changes that we've made since Fitch, or the things that Fitch has had some sort of contact with, whether we've used that as a guide or how it's impacted our decision making. And then we'll wrap up with kind of a description of what our current deployment model is, because this is where our jumping off point is for the future. This is where we are right now. So Town Manager Hart's done a very nice job of kind of starting us, but the Fitch report was commissioned in 2018, and they issued their report in April of 2019. Fitch is a nationally renowned consultant. They did a very thorough analysis. We were very pleased with how they produced their report. They did present some simplified recommendations, but they also had a higher level of granular detail, more appropriate, I think, for, people in the fire service to be able to really analyze. So we enjoyed having them here, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank, the council at the time and Town Manager Hart for his foresight, and investment in this particular project, because we've used this to get ideas on improvements for our fire department, but also the opportunities which have both been, consolidated under as recommendations. As Town Manager Hart has pointed out, we started a process of reviewing this. However, the pandemic struck and it was appropriately placed onto a back burner, but we've had a multitude of changes since the time that the study was issued. I'd like to provide a little bit of an opening opinion from me, which is, I think that this investment overall provided us a very good reassurance that we're providing high quality fire rescue and EMS, but we did it through a process of data analysis, not feelings and common sense. The process of going through working with Fitch was very helpful. It was very introspective. And when the report was produced, and even to some extent before it was, Fitch provided us with a guide to make some decisions. We already had identified some gaps in our organization after my arrival in 2018. We were in the process of shoring it up, but Fitch highlighted some of those. And currently, we've made some shoring up, but we still have some more to be done. But, in the context of this, right, they provided us opportunities from an outsider's perspective. And I'd like to put the positive spin on it right now, which is sometimes it's good to have the outside opinion from somebody else evaluating you. So we appreciated having somebody with this level of experience and depth of knowledge assessing the West Hartford Fire Department and the town of West Hartford relative to the fire service. So over the next few nights, we're going to condense a 156-page report. But really, in order to do an effective job of keeping it at the executive level, you'll have to, provide me with that. It's a little bit of an interpretation. I'm providing my interpretation of the report. I'm obviously a town employee, vested interest in this. I'm not a Fitch member, but I will convey it to the best of my ability. And I know that other team members will be able to assist, such as Town Manager Hart and perhaps other members of the Public Safety Committee who were there for some of the meetings with Fitch. I think there's a good book called Crucial Conversations out there. And one of the things that they speak about is about mutual purpose and understanding. And I'd like to try and help get some mutual purpose of what we're doing with the Fitch study, which is I think we should all be aiming towards some sort of end state that involves a core of well-trained employees who are properly equipped, located, and deployed, so that we can provide a very high level of service to our citizens, but also at the most efficient cost. As we discuss further about level of service, I'd like to acknowledge that, level of service is not really something that is determined with one particular lens. It has to be a balance of our industry standards, national benchmarks, policymaker decisions, but also our community's expectations of what level of service that they would like to be provided with, especially in a premier community like West Hartford. Whatever context we look at the West Hartford Fire Department in, I would ask that the Public Safety Committee members, and perhaps even those viewing, look at the fire department as an all hazards department. We are problem solvers. We saw how this played out for us in a pandemic. There's kind of a humorous expression that sometimes when you don't know who to call, you call the fire department. And I do believe that while our core mission is fire suppression, rescue, and emergency medical services, we do have a lot of other capabilities, and we are a very adaptable organization. So I would be remiss not to discuss that there are some limitations to reviewing the study. The first is the data set that was used to compile it was based upon information from fiscal year 13 to fiscal year 18. So as we discuss this, response times and the data and some other elements to this report will rely upon the data that was provided by the town to Fitch. But it is my opinion that we have to stay with this type of data, the data that we provided to Fitch, in order to use the right level of analysis on the Fitch's recommendations, because we're not in a position to take and go and recreate the data and then perform the same level of analysis that Fitch provided for us. So speaking towards our dispatch times, a lot of these times were fed to Fitch, again, as I said, ending in fiscal year 18. But when we looked at the Fitch report, we discussed with it as town stakeholders. But what I would say is everyone involved in the town, we were unilaterally fairly uncertain about the data reliability that was provided to them. Not so much that there was anything wrong with the data, it was the means and the measures for how we were capturing the data. And I'm going to provide an example because I think it's important, which is when we calculate the total response time, or the time that it took, us to receive a call and arrive on a scene, we were evaluating specific cases, such as when the police department would go to a motor vehicle accident, there would be no reported injuries in the beginning. Then somebody would complain of pain, or the police officer would believe that an assessment of the patient was required. So they would then activate the fire department. And one of our concerns is we would look at our response times and they would appear to be quite significantly longer. And the reason for that is the way that the information was going into our computer aided dispatch, or CAD system. So I launched that as kind of a limitation for when we think about it. And my next bullet that I have on the PowerPoint here is we do have to acknowledge that 2 years have passed. And sometimes, or I think I would better say that I think it's acknowledged that a study is a snapshot in time and conditions. So things have changed significantly. My next note there is that changes are algebraic and not arithmetic. What that is perhaps a little tongue in cheek to say that when you change a variable in an equation, the answer is not always as easy to figure out. It becomes a little bit more complicated. It is not simply a matter of adding or subtracting and coming up with a number. So the relationship to the Fitch study is we've made so many changes over a short period of time that we just have to take that into consideration when we're evaluating Fitch's recommendations. Obviously, the pandemic was never considered as part of the Fitch study. And then now I will kind of counter my earlier comment, which is that sometimes with an outsider's perspective, there may or may not be the ability to miss on some of the complexity of the recommendations, or not having a full understanding of the local conditions that are at play. So moving off of limitations and going through a couple of the brief takeaways, it's actually not brief, but some of the takeaways from the Fitch report is this. What Fitch said is that based on the data they were provided, we had a 6.5-minute travel time, and that was within the realm of their national experience. The call volume for the West Hartford Fire Department was reasonably distributed across its 5 stations. I'll get more into our districts a little bit later in the presentation. The workload of the firefighters out on the street was reasonable. UHU, as you see it on the screen, is called the unit hour of utilization, and it's a measure of workforce, how much the workforce is committed to a task over a certain period of time. What it, you know, I'm interpreting a little bit, but our workload was reasonable. We had 2 stations that were approaching the national standard. If you wanted to review in the manual, I believe it speaks to a 0.3 unit hour of utilization is appropriate for a 24-hour shift schedule, and 2 of our stations were at a 0.2. So we were approaching, but we were within that. The note there that you see on the screen about excluded NE is that excludes our non-emergency activities. And I do believe as a community organization, a lot of time is spent on engaging and interacting with our community. It's very important. As Town Manager Hart already alluded, they've suggested, or they've reviewed, and they've looked at our facilities, and all of our fire stations are at capacity and need modernization. We can discuss that more on a different night in more detail, but it is something as simple as is not having male and female bathrooms in all of our fire stations. It can be more complex, such as the physical configuration of it, and certainly the pandemic has shown us the need to try and separate employees or give them the ability to be separated. So these will be items that we will bring up in the future. Fitch predicted that our call volume was going to increase, but obviously the pandemic has thrown a little wrench in that. So we'll to be determined how that goes. Fitch noted that what's called our temporal demand, or the time that our calls come in, that we're about 2 to 3 times busier during the 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. period of time. But I would really like to draw your attention to the fact that while that might bring people down a path to think about staffing on the day shift being different than it should be on a night shift, you know, in the evening hours is when our residential, you know, communities become filled, as most people work day shifts and are coming into their residences. So what I would consider that is our fire risk is increasing. Our civilian fire risk increases during the nighttime hours. This is somewhat self-explanatory, but the Fitch did provide us with a data analysis, said that the less available units that we have, or the, you know, when they are not busy or they're not committed to their calls, the response times elongate. Our fire and EMS ratio, which is still consistent today, it's approximately 70% EMS, 30% EMS. 93% of the time, the fire department arrived before American Medical Response, who is our transport provider and an excellent partner to the town of West Hartford. But as part of the Fitch study, they brought new context, and they brought the concept of an effective response force more out into public, and to be more of a concept that we should talk about at a higher level. Whereas we used to talk about staffing as the minimum amount of people on an apparatus, effective response force is the amount of people that you can put together to be able to work on time-sensitive, time-critical tasks to be able to effectuate firefighting. So one of the things that the Fitch study was conspicuously absent of is a specific notation of whether or not the staffing of the West Hartford Fire Department was acceptable or not acceptable. So the way I've chosen to try and explain this is the way we look at the appropriateness of staffing, based on how the industry looks at this, is how long does it take to put a certain group of people together to work on time-sensitive tasks to be able to put out fires. And we then look at national standards, which range anywhere from 8 minutes, which is the NFPA 1710, it's a consensus standard, all the way up to 10 minutes, which is the Commission on Fire Accreditation International Standards. West Hartford does approximately 72% of their calls within 12 minutes. So the inference that we took away from the Fitch study is that our staffing was not too low, but it was not too high either. And this was evidenced in the verbal conversations that we had with Fitch as well, with members of the council. So I would like to discuss, kind of sidestep a little bit on page 4, that Fitch has a commentary about 15 people. The single home structure fire requires approximately 15 personnel to effectively cover all of the time-sensitive critical tasks. It is my belief that I feel that that statement is a little bit misleading when it comes to applicability in West Hartford. And I'm very appreciative to be joined tonight by Chief Cincigali. So thank him for his work on putting together a property assessment. But we have 149 properties that apply under the 15 personnel. And one other quick bullet is that when we're doing EMS, obviously it affects our ability to gather and organize an effective response force. So I'll take a quick second to speak about NFPA 1710 because it is a guiding consensus standard. We talked about time-sensitive critical tasks and how long it takes to compile people together. I would encourage any council member or anybody watching that there's a very short 3-minute video that can be easily accessible off of Google regarding how fire departments staff an initial structure fire. It's very short and simple, but I recommend it to help process this concept. But this is what the NFPA 1710 says, which is that a single family residence under 2,000 square feet with no basement and no exposures, meaning no other properties close to it, that 15 firefighters is the appropriate amount of folks. But then the NFPA then jumps up. There is no middle ground here on this, which it's an open air strip mall between 13,000 to 196,000 square feet. It requires 28 personnel. So that's over what West Hartford has. I will then, I'll just quickly hit garden apartment, which is a 1,200 square foot apartment in a 3-story building. Again, requires 28 people, and a high rise, of which I don't believe we have any in West Hartford. It's 42 firefighters. So here is a little snapshot of what West Hartford consists of. And I would draw your attention to, we have about 10,000 1 or 2 family dwellings that are under 2,000 square feet, but only 149 don't have basements. So I believe that our risk is higher, and I believe that 15 personnel as referenced by Fitch, and bringing that into our discussion about staffing is not exactly the best place for it. So continuing on with some of the takeaways from the Fitch study, they've noted that it takes us 1.64 full-time employees to fill 1 seat of our minimum staffing, and that's as a result of the benefit time. We are only staff, meaning we only have enough employees hired in the operations division for each seat, so we don't have any excess personnel to accommodate the benefit time. And obviously, as you've heard before, there are overtime implications of having to fill every time somebody is not at work. I then draw your attention to, page 16 and also page 19 of the Fitch executive summary, if you would like to see more about the observations and the recommendations. And I've completed this part of the key takeaways. Madam Chair, with your permission, I would just ask Town Manager Hart if he would like me to pause here for any questions, or if he'd like to continue with the presentation.
Mr. Hart?
Madam Chair, I think it's up to the committee members, if you have questions now or if you would prefer to keep going.
Okay, I'm going to ask any of the committee members, do you have any questions right now, or would you like to wait until the end of the presentation? And I can't see you because the PowerPoint is, let me see here. Okay, there we go. What's your pleasure? Shall we wait until after the presentation, or do you have any burning questions that you would like to ask right now? Chris, do you have a question?
Well, Madam Chair, I just think it might make sense to go through the whole presentation, but that's just my thing.
Yep. Anybody else have any other thoughts? Okay, Chief Priest, you can continue.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. I just didn't want to get too long on the tooth without the opportunity for comments or questions. So I'll continue. I have a few thoughts as we proceed. I think, first of all, we are offering an incredibly high level of service to our community right now, and we have in the past. I think that the staffing in our operations division in 2018 was appropriate. My assessment is that the station placement where our stations are located in town is appropriate. But I want to make sure that as we start to talk about recommendations, that there is a very clear difference between what is needed as an improvement and what is an opportunity because when there are opportunities presented, I believe that the complexity gets a little bit more difficult. And then obviously I kind of refer back to as we start to really get into this, you know, the data set, you know, we've had so many changes in local view, you know, our opinions, you know, as executive fire officers, and that the experiences that we bring in from our staff, you know, are important as we think about the best path forward. So the next kind of slides as I go through, just to explain the title is these were recommendations made by Fitch and where we have already made changes or where we've already taken action. So first is in facilities. We have followed their recommendations, and we have successfully, with the approval of the council in a previous fiscal year, funded a facility study. We have the training tower and the capital improvement plan for fiscal year 2024. So we consider these items that are completed. We have a written vehicle replacement plan. Our bonded and heavier vehicles are in good shape, and they are also appropriately placed in the capital improvement plan. As far as dispatch and EMD, there were significant findings that were in this part of the Fitch report. And our first and foremost and the best move, thanks to Chief Riddick for his assistance and the council for approving it. We've hired Todd as the dispatch manager, and we've seen astronomically just fantastic improvement in the dispatch center. I can't speak highly enough of what we've done there. So we have gotten so much better engagement. We're better involvement in our data and our programming of the system. And then also we inside of the fire department have consolidated our records into a single ESO solutions platform. And we've implemented emergency medical dispatch, which is a way of triaging calls. So at this point in time, I consider those items to be done, but I would like Todd to just take a few minutes to describe from his perspective what's done. I do think it's important to give him the floor for a moment, Madam Chair, if that's all right with you. I will then pick up after Todd has spoken.
Yes, that's fine.
Go ahead, Todd. I'm going to leave you.
So looking at the Fitch study and the issues that they came up with that needed to be looked at for dispatch, EMD being the biggest chunk of it, but also maximizing use of technology, updating the workflow and how we process calls in there, and also looking at data and some of those issues with the fire response times as Chief Priest mentioned earlier about, you know, PD calls starts off as a PD call, then becomes a fire call. So I'll go through just each point just real quickly. You know, the study was done between 13 and 18, and back in those times CAD was not used the way it is now. Everything is entirely software based driven, CAD with the CAD and with the ProQA software, which is the call handling software they use for EMS and fire calls. Another part of the technology piece would be using for data is a program called Power BI, which thanks to Captain Pruccio on the PD side of getting that going and showing us how to use that to improve the response times, deployment, etc. Look at call volume per unit. And then the other thing was the AMR CAD link was mentioned in that, and that's a link between us and AMR for our ambulances to make the process a little quicker. So when the dispatchers take a medical call, our CAD, our computer, and the AMR computers talk to each other. And NextGen, our CAD vendor, added a feature to that where we can monitor that link 24/7. So if there's a problem that goes down, we can use our backups, which is a phone call, to AMR, but it makes it quicker and easier for the dispatchers to focus on the calls. Another change that I made was updating, adding a position that's a radio only position. The dispatchers were previously taking the calls and then both call taking and dispatching at the same time, which has some safety concerns with the fire department and, you know, workflow, better customer service for the citizens. So a call taker can focus on the caller and the dispatcher can focus on dispatching units, both AMR and the fire department. So I created a fourth position and have that built so that they can accomplish that. And then another thing was the EMD and EFD, the emergency medical dispatch, emergency fire dispatch. And I'll start with the EFD real quick. One of their points was we are only running off of 4 call types. And we've created we have 13 now, and it broke apart structure responses, rescue responses, fire alarms, hazardous material, and they're mostly based on what the EFD recommends. And working with Assistant Chief O'Callahan and some of the battalion chiefs on getting those responses tuned in. For EMD, one of the biggest changes was it's the difference between taking a call and just sending everybody, no matter what, to having a more precise approach for each call. And the dispatchers, it's a better customer service level for the citizens. The dispatchers do more with them if they have bigger issues, and then having a tiered response. So there's calls, lower acuity calls where the fire department doesn't need to go, and then some calls which are higher acuity calls, which they're dispatched faster with better information. Based on the quality control, and that's the other part too, is that there's quality control now. That wasn't in place before. There's I do the quality control for it based on the priority dispatch system. But based on their standards, our tiered approach to sending units now, even in the first 6 months, we're at a 98% accuracy for that. So 98% of the time, we're getting exactly the right resources to the emergency. And then the last thing I know Chief Priest touched on before is those PD calls where the fire department was added. Looking at it, and I'm not sure what data they use for that 13 to 18 study, but looking at it now, those PD calls that turn into fire calls account for about 3% of our total call volume. So that number is not so impactful. Our response times are more accurate, and I'm able to, through that Power BI program, to pull better data out and get more accurate data if Chief Priest requests it, so that we can decide on how we want to change things if they need to be changed, etc. Overall, it's a lot of work, and I know Chief Priest mentioned at the beginning, but for me, I give a lot of credit to the dispatchers. They've worked very hard, embraced all these changes, and come to work with a lot more on their plate, and they've done a very good job with it. And I'll hand it over to Chief Priest.
Thank you very much, Todd. So moving forward, these are other recommendations with changes that we've made in the fire marshal's office. The Fitch terms it the fire prevention. We've filled out the staff. We had some staff vacancy for a little bit. We have created the deputy fire marshal position with one of the inspector positions. It's improved the capacity of the fire marshal's office to do plan review. We've been able to secure our fire inspectors to be able to do investigation. And also we've reworked our company officer inspection program, which is a program that we had in place where our company officers assigned in the operations division can assist the fire marshal's office with that. So I'd like to give some credit to Chief Cincigali. One of the things that certainly we've been watching over the years is, and Fitch has noted, is trying to get our statutory inspection history up. I've provided the chart for you, and very pleased that Chief Cincigali has provided these metrics to show that our statutory inspection history is up. I would just offer one caveat, which is this is specifically towards statutory inspections, and that there are significantly other activities that occur in the fire marshal's office of great importance, but we did want to get a quick look at that, and on fire marshal night where we can get into this more. With regards to our training division, I'm joined by Chief Mark Bassett, who's our second Battalion Chief of Training and Support Services. We elevated the position from captain's rank to a battalion chief's rank. As one of the first battalion who came in here, initiated the OSHA Voluntary Protection Program. You heard about this with our fire gear, but really we were checking to make sure that our training met the national standards. We've leveraged the use of Target Solutions, which is our electronic training software. So that improves the medium or gives us a different medium. There's an online version of it, but also it increases our hours tracking. We have updated our written training plan for all of our staff, and we have paid particular attention to building basic and specialized skill maintenance over the course of the year. And then lastly, with regards to training, by elevating the battalion chief position to the same level or the same rank as our line shift commanders, we've been able to increase those partnerships to improve the training. Again, this is something that we've completed. So I have to take a quick second to talk about terminology because I'm going to use some in a moment. The first is I need to differentiate the difference between EMT versus paramedic, or basic life support and advanced life support. So emergency medical technicians receive approximately 200 hours of training. They are taught to recognize conditions and provide basic medical treatment. It's an integral part of the EMS system, but it's the first layer of the EMS system. Currently, we're running a paramedic level service, or sometimes we call it ALS, or standing for Advanced Life Support. It's about 59 college credits, an associate's degree. It takes a significant amount of time to do it, but there is a lot of clinical training, meaning there's hands-on training with live patients and in hospital settings. They're licensed, independently licensed medical providers by the state. They have close oversight from our medical control Hartford Hospital, and they require a certain amount of skills every year. But I like to, it's a little bit wordy on here, but I just like to say that sometimes it isn't about the skills that are done. It's about the assessment, the training and experience that they bring to the patient. So to emphasize this, when a paramedic comes and provides an assessment of a patient who's reported to have some sort of advanced life support type condition, there is a state rate. There is something that the West Hartford Fire Department is able to charge a patient for to be able to provide that assessment. Paramedics bring significant capabilities, whether it's pain management, EKG interpretation, medication administration, and advanced airway skills. So now speaking to our deployment, I know this has been the source of a lot of talk. This is very interesting to our department. We've had a lot of changes here. I'm going to cover it quickly, but there's a little bit of a lead in. We were able to successfully sign off on a collective bargaining agreement. We've hired an assistant chief of operations, Chief O'Callahan. We were able to get a EMS officer who's currently Jason Cintron in there to work specifically on our EMS programs. Jason works for Chief Bassett in training and support services. And then obviously you've heard about our significant improvement in dispatch, whether it be an emergency medical dispatch, districts, collaboration with the manager. So the pandemic expedited the way that we deployed our fire department because we were trying to provide for the most amount of safety for our personnel and the best amount of response. But we moved to 3 ALS light units. We increased our minimum staffing on a daily basis to 22 person minimum. And that was specifically to be able to accommodate the 3rd unit. And that position was funded through reimbursement measures available through the COVID-19 emergency protective measures. This increased the safety of our personnel because it sent less people to a call, less exposure to the virus. It improved our operations. We no longer required our heavier apparatus to retrieve paramedics. We increased the service to the community, in my opinion, because by adding additional available units, when there were call concurrencies, meaning there were more than one call at a time, we had other units available to back it up. And then lastly, it increased our fire suppression crew integrity, meaning that all of our fire apparatus stayed at 3 personnel all the time, so that would allow the officer to be able to facilitate training and be less concerned about having to go pick up paramedics and come back. A side effect of not using our heavier apparatus was the decreased mileage and fuel, which we discussed with the committee before. But very notably, this has now provided us with a data stream for when we're now operating with a lighter duty EMS units. I'm going to cover the districts very quickly because I think it'll be important in some subsequent conversations, but we have 5 fire districts that are in the town of West Hartford. You can see where they're notated right there. Pre-pandemic, I know it's a little bit of a busy slide, but in a nutshell, we have Station 1, We had each one of these apparatus that you see were paramedics. They were responsible for retrieving it. Station 1 through 5 all had a paramedic that were on apparatus. When the pandemic struck, we needed to look at our operations, and through some analysis, you'll forgive me that it looks like you know, a grade school person put together this PowerPoint presentation, but it's so new that we don't have maps on it yet. But we created three EMS intercept and transport districts for the town. This allowed us to take and put the three units that I discussed before in play, and these were their response areas. So fundamentally, this is what it looked like. But we also had this backdrop of the rest of the apparatus that were in town that were just at a lower staffing configuration. There were 3 people. So this model was very effective for us by having these light duty intercept models cover the 3 sections of town. It equally distributed the call volume for our light duty medics. It also equally distributed the response times. The response times were very good for all 3 of those districts. So knowing that we're on the back half of the pandemic, we had to consider returning to our normal authorized staffing of 21. And then we knew that the FEMA reimbursement and the emergency protective measures were, you know, needing to be reevaluated. So really, Chief O'Callahan, Chief Bassett, Chief Smith, and others, they really did a very good analysis of what it would look like to run the 2 ALS units throughout town, whether or not east and west or north and south. But ultimately, after reviewing the data and using some of the Fitch study as well to inform us as to the number of units and the time of the calls, the location of the calls, the heat mapping, meaning like where the calls occur in town, we really are trying to use these 3 EMS districts to provide. So ultimately, what we are working on right now, it was deployed in June 1st, so just a day or so ago. We are looking to make sure that each one of our 5 fire districts has a paramedic assigned into it at all times, 24/7. And the dark blue circles that you saw go on there, this is a normal day shift in the town of West Hartford for the next few months as we try this out. These will be our transport units, meaning these will be where our intercept paramedics go in, pick up a patient, and accompany AMR to the hospital during the day shift, our busiest times. The 2 yellow circled apparatus will have paramedics assigned to them to make sure that there's a paramedic in the district for rapid first response to provide those life-saving measures. However, on a night shift, we're going to make a modification where we're going back to a 21-person minimum staffing, and as you can see, the difference is we're taking and pulling the light duty vehicle down, and we are putting 4 people back onto ladder 4 as an ALS apparatus. We will be responsible for retrieving them if necessary, but we have an agreement with AMR to try and return that particular paramedic. One of the other little moves that is occurring with that as well is the 2 fire suppression apparatus in the center of town are going to be BLS, so they're not going to be required to have paramedics on them. And this is paired with our hiring initiatives to remove barriers, provide an inclusive workforce, and also not to make sure that we become too overstaffed with paramedics to try and right-size the department, if you will. So our deployment, just on in words, we will be running 3 ALS light duty units during our busiest times. There's a medic in each district. We have BLS responders to back up the paramedics in District 1 and District 2. We're seeking to remove as many barriers that we can to try and recruit and retain a diverse workforce. During the nighttime, we are, this is the best model that we can do with 21 staff. There's 2 ALS units for transport. We have an agreement with AMR to return them, and we're going to be gathering data over a period of time. So Fitch also made some recommendations on improvements. I know we're going long a little bit here. When I say we're going long, I'm going long, but I'll get going. So we have more work to do in the area of ALS deployment. We have to look at our data and operations and shore it up. Our facilities, we know will need more attention. I'm looking forward to assisting and talking about how we can further assess them and plan for them. Our vehicle stock, well, good. We do have to consider increasing the number and replacing of our lighter duty vehicles to support our current deployment models. We know that we need to discuss more about our fire marshal resources and a plan to increase our inspections. And in our training division, we need to ensure that we're providing consistent training. And right now, currently Chief Bassett coordinates training rather than administers it because we have a large department. We're outsourcing our EMS training and the quality assurance of our EMS program. It's something that we need to take a look at. And then I've called it out as a chief's recommendation, which is what something that this the exercise in Fitch and the pandemic has taught me is that we definitely have administrative needs and planning needs inside of the administration that we can talk about, as well as our emergency management program, which has been critical in our pandemic response. So for our next meeting, obviously Fitch discussed station consolidations, but it's notable that they suggested maintaining the same effective response force to continue the same level of service with no reduction in staff. They did present some ideas on transport. I will step away and say that this is my opinion right now, but I think we need to be better at our ALS intercept first, because there are a significant amount of planning and complexities that need to be taken into consideration before we embark on that next step, if that is the direction that the town chooses to go. I'll be glad to take a deeper dive on any other of these subjects as we go through these meetings, at the direction of the town manager, the mayor, or public safety. And I would just reinforce again that, we will take and bring the Fitch recommendations, we'll pair them with our local recommendations and try and come up with a strategic vision for our policymakers in the town. And my final thoughts here are, we really have to balance between our disciplines. We can't overinvest in one. I've kind of said, you don't want an okay firefighter, but a great paramedic trying to put out your house fire, an okay paramedic, but a great firefighter treating you. We really need to be good at both. And we have to train and practice that. Both disciplines are regulated. Fire is more regulated by OSHA for worker protection, but we do have some statutory obligations, but many of the implications for how the fire service is regulated come through the consensus standards or benchmarks. However, EMS is highly regulated. It's part of the healthcare system. We have legal obligations, statutory obligations, regulatory obligations to perform in a certain manner. We know that Fitch really kind of focused on EMS and staffing, but it brought in other things. I would just ask for the idea of abandoning the notion that the EMS is uncomplicated and it's a filler. We're back. We are an all hazards department. We really need to make sure that we're good at all of our functions. The higher the level of care that we provide in EMS, the more complicated it's going to get. And we can't outsource all of our municipal responsibilities. And the trajectory across the country is not to silo EMS and fire. So we'll strive for simplicity where we can, but sometimes it's costly and inefficient. And then this concept is that the fire service is a readiness-based organization, which is we have to be ready for the emergency when it strikes. We can't always be looking at the demand for when that service occurs. The concept of less fires certainly does not mean less risk. If anything, when we take a look at high risk incidents or low frequency, high risk incidents, we have to be more prepared. We have to have the right staff available and trained. We have a great service to our community. Since 2016 is when we really made some significant changes. The West Hartford Fire Department has a long, proud tradition, but we really made that paramedic change in 2016. We've got better labor relations and we're really working together on these discussions. And then I bring back to where we started, which is I'm hoping that our mutual goal involves a core of well-trained employees, properly equipped, properly located and deployed to provide a high level of service at the most efficient cost. And I hope as we move forward, we'll focus on maintaining our current level of service, making sure that we have the right infrastructure and foundations inside of the department to support it. We'll make sure that we're being as efficient as possible, and then we will focus on our improvements. So if you ask, was there a return on investment for Fitch? Fitch is absolutely not stale. What Fitch is it was an excellent investment. It's provided us with its hallmarks, guidance, and I'll break every PowerPoint rule in the book and just show you we've done a lot of things that Fitch has touched upon or given us some ideas. I'm not going to go through them all. I've talked about them, but visually there has been a lot done in the fire department since 2018. So with that, I really would like to again thank the town manager and the public safety committee for your time, your willingness to listen to me for this long. Not that you had a choice, but Thanks to Chief Riddick and ERC. They've been absolutely critical partners throughout all of this. The members in the department have put up with changes in administration, deployment, pandemic, outstanding work by our folks. And lastly, to the folks who are sitting to the left, to the right of me, to Chief Cincigali and others, this has been quite a work in progress to put not this presentation together, but also to run this department for the last 2 years. So my thanks to both of you and everyone else who is up there. So with that, I can answer questions, concerns, or hear input for the next session at your pleasure, ma'am.
This is Deputy Mayor David Off speaking. Chairwoman Blanks is having some technical difficulties with her technology. So at this point, does anyone have any questions to the chief with regard to the presentation that was just given? Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Well, first off, thanks for the presentation. Very thorough. And hopefully, Chief, you could just send us a copy because there's a lot of information on there. But I guess I have some specific questions that are to response to your slides. But then with the overall process of where we're headed with this, Chief and Town Manager. So it was a few years ago, and at the end of Fitch, there were a couple potential models that were, I don't think recommended, maybe posited as potential new models for the department moving forward, given the steps that we have been taking. And since there's been such time that has passed since Fitch came out, do we still consider those models possibilities? Is that part of what we're potentially looking at in terms of potential consolidation or not? And so that's my first question. And is that sort of what we're working towards? Is like we're going through this process now, reviewing things. We're going to look at what Fitch said, I think, in some instances, but recognizing it's a snapshot. And then at the end of this, are we trying to come to a conclusion as to a recommendation with respects to how the model may change or should change in your view or not? I guess that's sort of a process question.
Mr. Hart, you would like to answer that, and then Chief Priest?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Thank you, Councilor Williams, for your good question. Yes, we think the models and options that Fitch had identified still remain very relevant and are worth reviewing, which is why we're bringing it to you. I think at the end of this process, we're looking for a couple of things. Number one, we want to solidify and endorse the deployment method that we're going to use at least over the next several years. Recall the Fitch report talks about options with respect to paramedic intercept service as well as transport. So we want to talk about that. You know, Chief Priest and I want to spend some time in particular talk about the intercept model, why we think that is a very good option for the town, at least for the next few to next several years. So we very much want to talk and spend time on deployment, including the advanced life support service and how that factors in. And then we want to talk about our station configuration and placement. And Fitch gave us some options to consider there. And again, those still remain relevant as well. So those are just a couple of things. And then, as the chief mentioned, looking at fire prevention, we want to talk again about the progress we've made, maybe some additional improvements we'd like to make in fire prevention moving forward. And then with respect to our fleet, any critical needs we might have there. So let me pause, and Madam Chair would ask Chief Priest to add to my comments.
Chief Priest, you have it.
Yes, ma'am. Actually, Town Manager Hart did an outstanding job kind of explaining that. I have nothing further.
Follow up, Mr. Williams.
So now I just have a sort of a detail, a more specific question as to the presentation, Chief. So with respect to the new model you've implemented starting in June with the 3 lighter vehicles on for part of the day, then 2 later on. 2-part question. The first one is, why is the difference? And I imagine it's maybe call volume, but if you could explain that a little bit more. And then when you have the 3 lighter vehicles in operation, if in one of the areas where if there's a call in an area that doesn't have the lighter vehicle, but the lighter vehicle is able to go into that area, would it still, if it could get there faster than the fire apparatus? You see what I'm getting at there? And the other question I have, and then I'll just end it, is that I heard you say there's a focus towards a BLS hiring, which I understand. But I also thought that hiring paramedics has been a challenge. So in terms of your vision for hiring moving forward, you looking for what kind of numbers what's going to be the focus? Do you have a ratio in terms of what you're going to need as a department moving forward, paramedics versus the BLS, and how you see that playing out? So thank you.
To Councilor Williams, Chief Priest.
Sure. So, Madam Chair, I'm going to have Chief O'Callahan answer the deployment question. I feel like he might be able to. He's been really in on this. I'd love to have him have a chance to explain that.
Thank you, sir.
Then I'll pick up the hiring question.
Okay. Mr. Williams, so during the daytime where we have the 3 medic intercept units on the road, based on our 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., our peak numbers during that time, with the 22 people, we're able to receive the emergency COVID measures. It's still protected under that, where we're seeing our peak COVID numbers still. We're operating somewhere around 1.2 a day with symptoms. So it's still covered under that protective measure. At nighttime, the numbers drop right off for medical calls. So that district up in Fours area, Albany Avenue, up that way, we're able to put the paramedic onto the apparatus, and the call volume is a little bit slower, meaning the apparatus would not have to go into the city to pick up the paramedic, and they would remain in their district, which is our goal, is to keep our fire apparatus in town for fire protection. I hope I answered that question. The 2 paramedics that we are running on the south side of town, if someone near the mall, the engine company down near the mall, Station 5, was sent to a medical call that would require advanced life support, we also do send a intercept unit with them. If the intercept unit can get there before the engine, they will cancel them to keep that apparatus available. But sometimes they're there together based on the level of service that's needed. And as Mr. Hungerford let us know, if it's a high acuity call, the more hands, the better for saving lives. So 5 people in certain circumstances, CPR, those kinds of situations, it's better to have the 5 people there. But certainly our members have been instructed, if they're not needed, they can be canceled off the call by either dispatch or the first arriving unit. I hope I answered that clearly. Okay.
So, Councilor Williams, I'll just pick up the second half of your question about BLS hiring and ALS hiring. We are struggling to attract qualified paramedic candidates, licensed candidates. Our pools are significantly smaller. As you know, our paramedics have the ability to promote up out of the paramedic rank and become officers or apparatus operators. So we are constantly trying to bring in paramedics as well. But we've been carrying a significant number of vacancies where we've now experienced a deployment plan that allows us to use EMTs. And we believe that as we move forward, it has to be balanced. So do I have a specific ratio? I don't. We'll always seek paramedics, but as you've heard me speak before, diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives and hiring a diverse workforce and attracting them into our community is critically important for us. While at the same time, it's important for us to have paramedics. So hopefully I grabbed that. Did I get that, Counselor?
One last follow-up real quick. On the paramedic front, I know there's been some incentives to have them stay on longer, and it's been a short period of time. Have you seen any evidence that is helping at all?
A clarifying question. Do you mean that in the contract when we changed the paramedic stipends?
Yes.
Sir, honestly, I don't know that I've done an analysis. My kind of immediate response to that is we brought our paramedic stipends in line with other career organizations that are around us. I don't believe that they're, higher or much lower than other folks, but retention and recruitment, absolutely something that we will continue to be talking about over the course of, both the Fitch study and afterwards. Thank you for your questions, Counselor.
Thank you, Counselor Williams. Any other questions? Deputy Mayor Davidoff.
Thank you, Chairwoman Blanks. I'm glad that we got back to starting to review the Fitch study after a lengthy hiatus, but something that was out of our control took place in the interim. So, but what the Fitch study did when we were reviewing it was, and I think the manager highlighted, was we were looking at what type of intercept model we wish to enact, what was our facilities, what was our plans with our facilities, are they in the right place, are they good environments for working, because many of our personnel spend a lot of time in that building when they're not on the road. The equipment that is used, not only the vehicles, but also the gear that and the apparatus that our men and women of the force need to successfully do their job. The training and the hiring, all those components. So this was all interrelated. So I think we're probably at that point where we can have further discussions to take apart this. Chief, you mentioned that the Fitch report was done a number of years ago, and the data was starting to get old, and I was sort of concerned about whether or not it was stale. And you said that probably some of the data may be stale. It's obviously not the most current, but I think it lays a framework for us to undergo the discussions with respect to all the items that I touched upon. And the other item that I didn't touch upon was inspections, and that had come up several years in budget discussions as to did we have enough people to provide the necessary services with respect to plan review, all these other things that needed to be inspected on a yearly basis to make certain that we were taking all the steps necessary for prevention. So from where I sit and from the duration of the time that I've been on the committee, the thing that has struck out to me in terms of the commentary from members of the community was response time has never really been a major issue in our community. People know that when a 911 call goes in, someone comes there quite rapidly, and they're well trained and able to assess the situation. And we've had has been noted on many occasions, some very successful outcomes, which would not have been the case had we not deployed the right resources in terms of people and or equipment. What concerns me is, and it has always concerned me, is sending a $750,000 piece of apparatus to a medical call. And I really do like the fact that we're using light duty intercept vehicles to accomplish that. I think from a resource preservation model, it makes more sense to do that. So we were able to pivot to that during the past year. I think prior to the pandemic, a lot of the people in the community, their concern was, is it really necessary to show up with this vehicle or all these vehicles to a call? So I think what people have noticed is that doesn't happen anymore. And so that totally has been eliminated from the community discussion with respect to the interactions that I've seen. So I don't know where we want to go in future meetings with respect to the items. I think what I mentioned at the beginning was the core elements of the Fitch report. So it would be interesting to hear in the next meetings what your thoughts and what the thoughts of the leadership are with respect to implementation that's effective and efficient and the best uses of our resources. So there's no doubt in our community's mind that our fire department is ready and able 24/7 to respond to whatever they may encounter. So that part's not on the table. But what is on the table are those other variables in terms of making the job safer, to making the job an opportunity that people want to pursue and think that it's a worthwhile career. Making certain that we have the proper apparatus to keep people safe, and just whatever safeguards we can take that don't deflect from that perception, I think is the key. Because we don't suffer from a perception of not offering the best service. We have that. So whatever we can do to augment that, I think that's important. And I'll just finish with this. Obviously, we have limited resources to accomplish that. And everything that you do in the department is very labor intensive. It's not a 9-to-5 thing where we can just hire some temporary person because somebody can't come in today on a part-time basis. It just doesn't work. The nature of the fire department is we need trained professionals 24/7. And I think in terms of the budget, that has always been a driving force with respect to hours worked, additional hours worked in terms of overtime concerns. And we do struggle with that at the council level. But I think what has been very apparent is we've always funded the overtime. It's not a thing, oh, maybe nothing will happen, we just won't offer overtime. That's not an option. So and I think the last thing is, I don't know if any of the standards have changed since Fitch undertook its study with respect to the fire service. That would be helpful to know whether or not best practices that were in place when they reviewed it from 13 to 18 are still the same best practices. So that's what I would be looking forward that's what I'd be looking for going forward. So thank you for your presentation, and that's all I have for this evening.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Davidoff. Any other questions, Mr. Gold?
Yes, thank you. But I think Chief Priest had his hand up to respond. And I'll be very quick and brief because I know Mr. Williams and Mr. Davidoff kind of covered a lot of the basics. Number one, thank you very much for the presentation. It's very informative and you were not long-winded, so thank you. It was helpful. But my question and kind of a theme that I gathered through this as I was looking at your rudimentary cutting up of the town with different sort of pie graphs was the thought that there should be some sort of consolidation. Is that, and it seemed to be a theme through that I gathered from the Fitch Report that I'm hearing also in the beginnings of tonight, something that we've discussed in prior meetings and other committee levels and at the town level. Is that something that is on your mind in terms of a process to begin more of a consolidation, to become more effective and streamlined through this process? So that's where my question and thoughts went.
Thank you, Mr. Gold. Chief Priest?
Thank you, Counselor, for the question. My best way of answering that is I have no preconceived notions about that. Station consolidation, I want to make sure what we're talking about as a station consolidation was certainly something that was referenced in the Fitch Report. And as we go through on other nights, I really want to be able to take the time and speak to you about how fire districts were very well placed in the town of West Hartford many years ago, and what the implications are of rearranging stations. We know I'm not going to say for a fact, but what Fitch is saying is we need the same amount of staff, but we can do it from different station locations. I have some reservations about that. I think we have some critical facilities that need to be addressed, but I believe that there's more robust conversation that we need to have before I kind of commit to saying, yes, I'm trying to drive for station consolidation. So there's a lot of fire suppression that has to be looked at. There has to be fire risk response times at EMS that has to be measured. But we also have to be very, very, very clear with both our workforce and our community about what that means if we were to, take and build one big station or several different stations and the cost implications of that. So I'll continue to talk about with the manager. This is the best part of these meetings is hearing, the input from our policymakers about what they believe is necessary, and then me responding back with our experience and recommendations as well.
Thank you, Chief Priest. Anything further, Mr. Gold? Okay, all right. Thank you. Oh, there, yeah, Chief Priest.
Chairman, thank you. I just wanted to provide some quick feedback to Councilor Davidoff. First of all, thank you for recognizing a lot of the things that go on in the fire department, sir. I know our personnel appreciate that greatly, and your respect for them. I wanted to kind of qualify my comment if it came out about stale data. I just would say it wasn't intended to say that in terms of staleness. What I think I was probably leading to is I wanted to make sure that we were being very accurate with what data was being used in the study. But my real answer is I don't think that there's a significant variation in the data that was used to produce the recommendations. Anecdotally, we have, everything seems to be about right. There was some funky things in how the dispatch center was working. Todd's got that fixed, but I think our response times have probably not changed very much. Kind of the second point is your comments about sending heavy apparatus. One of our primary goals is to have short response times to medical calls, but it's also about keeping our fire suppression apparatus in district so that they have quick response times for their firefighting obligations. We still intend to use our larger apparatus to respond to basic life support calls inside of the district, but we would not need to send an advanced life support resource as well. But when we send to a BLS level call that will end at a BLS level transport by AMR, that fire suppression apparatus is immediately back in service. They remain inside of their district. So, and the wear and tear is less because they wouldn't have to go and retrieve a paramedic from the hospital. So I don't want you to think that we are not going to use our fire suppression apparatus for EMS. Matter of fact, we're going to be using it more on the lower acuity calls, but I think that is pretty much all I have. So thank you very much for your remarks, sir.
Thank you, Chief Priest, and thank you for the presentation. I've been hearing a lot about this Fitch study before I became a member of the council. So, thank you for the summary, the wealth of information that this study has provided, and I do plan on delving more into it as we continue these discussions. And I don't want to belabor this because I know the time is getting long, but I do have two quick questions. I guess it would be regarding the data. So one, Mr. Hungerford, I believe you mentioned the record consolidation as you were talking about the Something Solutions platform. If you could just elaborate for me on that in terms of explaining what does that mean in terms of the record consolidation? And then I have another question following that. Or Chief Priest.
Council Chair, I'll pick that question up. So prior to 2018, we were using one particular computer software platform for electronic patient care reporting. We were then using something called Firehouse software, which is where our fire records were kept. What we've done is several years ago, we procured one single software platform that takes and uses the same data coming out of the dispatch center to feed the data inside of both our patient care reports, but also our fire incident reports. So when you look at, say, for example, one of my staff reports, we're pulling all of that information out of one central repository instead of trying to pull it from different areas. And we're very, very confident now that the information and the way that we're processing information inside of the dispatch center is then being pushed electronically into a single record software for the fire department, and it involves our fire marshal's office as well. So that's what I mean by a consolidated records map.
Thank you for that clarification. And then the other question I had was, believe you spoke to the call volume per unit, and why is that important?
So ultimately, call volume and stabilizing the calls amongst the different units and keeping the workload within the national standards is such that we're trying to keep and make sure that we have available units to respond to other calls. So if we have less amount of units, then they start getting out of position, they start having to transport, it leaves gaps in our response matrix that other units then have to call. So it's kind of a compounding effect. If we send one apparatus away or one paramedic away, and then another call happens in that district, we then start moving out of position and our response times elongate. So that's why we try and keep everything in district. So I get that. Yeah. Yes. Okay. All right. That concludes my answer, ma'am.
Thank you for that, Chief Priest. Okay. If there aren't any other questions, we can move to the next agenda item, which is the training outline for Civilian Police Review Board. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Hart and Chief Riddick. So Mr. Hart, you want to take this first?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Yes, we wanted to review this with the committee one last time before we embark upon the training of our new Civilian Police Review Board, which held its inaugural meeting last night. So it was really neat to be there and to meet the board members and wish them well in the journey ahead. We look forward to working with them. So with respect to the proposed curriculum you have in front of you, it's only slightly modified from the last time you saw it. We would be looking to condense the classroom training into roughly 8 to 10 hours. And then there would be 2 voluntary elements as well that we would highly recommend. So if you have a chance to pull it up in board docs, I'll just hit some of the highlights. So we begin with a bit of an orientation. We would talk about the purpose of the board, why the council established it. We talk a little bit about the town government, how we're organized, how we're set up. We would then have a conversation on various legal considerations, such as freedom of information, various state and local laws that relate to police officers, their personnel rights, ethics training as well. We want to make sure that we brief the new members regarding the town's existing ethics code. And that is something we really should do with every new board and commission. We should give them a good orientation to our ethics code. Next, we would provide them with a condensed version of our existing Citizens Police Academy which we think they would find to be extremely useful. Just a few of the elements we would discuss in that forum. We talk about patrol practices and procedures. We would talk about use of force guidelines. That's going to be so critical to their work. First Amendment activities as well. Those are just some examples. Community-based policing. What does that mean in theory and in practice? As well as a discussion on professional standards. The next major category would be a discussion on board procedures. What's their intake going to look like? How are they going to review the cases? How are they going to conduct their meetings, communications, etc.? And then last but not least, again, these would be voluntary activities, but highly recommended. We're going to recommend that each and every member participate in a ride-along, either by themselves or perhaps with another member, a ride-along with one of our officers. The chief would make those assignments, and that would give them, an opportunity to observe firsthand what our officers face in a given shift. And then secondly, we would also like to bring them in small groups to a use of force simulator that the Milford Police Department has. Milford has graciously agreed to do this for us. We would transport the members down, and it would give them an opportunity to experience how our officers are trained to respond to use of force situations, as well as the de-escalation techniques that our officers are taught. So why don't I pause there, Madam Chair, and ask Chief Riddick to elaborate, touch on anything I might have missed.
Through you, Madam Chair, Mr. Manager, you did an excellent job. I really have nothing else to add. I can answer questions, but you summarized it quite succinctly.
Thank you, Mr. Hart and Chief Riddick. Are there any questions? No questions? Okay, I have one question. Mr. Hart, where you mentioned the training is going to be about 8 to 10 hours, and I know this is new. They just met for the first time last night. Do you or Chief have any idea how that training will be scheduled or configured? So are you looking at evening and maybe 4 hours each evening, or what would that look like? And then how would you also then, I guess, add in the ride along? And I'm just thinking, I know that this is volunteer, everyone is just getting back into the work mode, if you will, meaning going back into the office. And the fact that we've all were unable to really socialize for the past year and some months. So that's just kind of my question and some comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Let me talk about how we would conduct the training, and then Chief can discuss how we would handle the ride-alongs coming out of the pandemic to make sure everybody's safe. So with respect to the training, we're going to work with the new board chair to develop a schedule that works for them. We're very flexible, as we explained last night. If they want to do one long day and try to manage most of this, we're amenable to that. Or if they'd like to break it up over 2, maybe 3 sessions at most, we're amenable to that as well. My sense is, just some feedback I heard from the mayor, is that that's what they're interested in. The latter option is that they would like to have a couple of sessions over their next few meetings instead of doing it all in one day. But again, we're flexible. We'll coordinate with them. So that, Madam Chair, I'd recognize the Chief next to talk about how we would handle the ride-alongs.
Okay, thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, Chief Riddick, the ride-along scheduling will be based upon the demand. Who wants to ride? We're 24/7, 365, so we can accommodate whatever. It really doesn't impact us at all. But we would request, because we're not allowed to ask who's vaccinated and who's not, but we would ask folks to wear a mask, as well as have our officers wear a mask in the vehicle. But it's open. We're ready. Thank you.
And Chief, just a quick question for me, because, I think about the safety of not only, the officers, of course, but also the members. So would it be advantageous to have one member ride in the patrol vehicle with our officers, or you're open to having more than one member? What are your thoughts?
It doesn't impact us either way. Normally, it's one individual. We can accommodate two. I don't find it to be, it's not problematic. But now you have two people you're introducing. If you're talking about COVID-wise, now you introduce three people into a small space.
Right.
Obviously, if they're wearing masks and everything else, we're fine. But I think one will be better. AC Tara, go ahead.
AC Tara, were you going to add?
Through you, Madam Chair, just to keep in mind that the patrol cars, there's a cage in the back, prisoners. So it'd be kind of not nice for the second person to sit in the back with the cage in front of them. Just throwing it out there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would agree. Okay. All right, thank you. Does anybody else have any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Hart and Chief Riddick. More to come on this. All right, next item is communications. Mr. Hart, any other communications, or we can move right into staff reports?
You can keep moving, Madam Chair.
Okay. Okay, so we have the fire department, Chief Priest. I know you already gave a very lengthy presentation, so I'm not sure if you have more that you wish to add, but I'll turn it over to you.
You beat me to the punch, ma'am. Greg Priest, Fire Chief. I've submitted a written report. I'm very appreciative for my staff to help compile that. The only thing notable in there is that our call volumes are increasing, and that's reflected in our stats. But thank you very much for the opportunity to provide a report. I will allow Chief Riddick to have at least one moment of tonight's.
Deputy Mayor Davidoff.
Thank you. I did read the report, Chief, and there was a portion of it that talked about the plan review for a restaurant in West Hartford Center that had outdoor vegetation at its entrance. And I just wanted to get an update as to where that matter stands. Reading the information from Chief Sensingali, I concur that it seems like a dangerous situation before we've even started. And I wasn't thinking all those things that he did in his professional duties, but I think that that review was critical and is critical because, and I don't know if there's still a difference of opinion between the party and the town, but I would always err on the side of safety because I don't think anybody wants to be a patron of an establishment where there's a risk to human life that they really wouldn't be cognizant of. It just looks nice, but from a fire safety point, it could be disastrous. So if I could just get an update on that, where that stands, that would be helpful.
Through you, Madam Chair, I would just ask Town Manager for Hart if he wanted to weigh in first before I turn it over to Chief Sensingali for a brief summary of where it stands.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Madam Chair. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Yes, Deputy Mayor, I also want to commend Chief Sensingali for actually being proactive, but working very closely with the applicant, with the business owner, as well as the professionals she has hired to test the material and work to come up with solutions. And I believe that conversation is still ongoing. I know it's been a lot of time and effort, but as you said, Deputy Mayor, it's absolutely critical. This demonstrates why our inspections are so important and why the life safety code is so important, because we hope to prevent bad things from occurring. So let me pause there and would ask Assistant Chief Cinsigali just to talk a little bit about his work on this application and the current status.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Through you, Madam Chair. Currently the material that was in question was forest moss, which is dried forest moss, which is considered extremely flammable. It had been treated twice with a material that really didn't affect its fire retardancy. The restaurant owners elected, rather than to take out the material, to have it tested by an independent materials testing laboratory. And in the words of the technician, the material failed miserably. So the recommendation of the testing laboratory and the project architect is to remove the material and replace it. We're standing by. We haven't heard officially from the restaurant what they intend to do, but I have pledged to them that as soon as they chart a course and we've approved it and they have done what they needed to do to either make the material safe or to remove the material, will act immediately so that they can get their certificate of occupancy and occupy the building. Throughout the process, we spent many hours trying to gather the data and gather the proper test reports to show that either the material was safe or the fire retardant compounds that they treated the material with were approved for use on that type of material. And every avenue, we just couldn't come up with the proper documentation, and that's why testing or removal was the only option. So right now, the material has to be removed, and as soon as it's removed, we'll certify the building for occupancy. I hope this answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you for the detailed response, and I appreciate all your efforts on this. It's often said that the reason we don't have a lot of structure fires in West Hartford is we're very proactive at the beginning, and we stay to the code and make certain that we enforce it while a building's being built or an improvement's being made, and throughout the life of the tenancy, we inspect to make certain that anybody occupying a space would be able to do so knowing that it was safe and it was up to code. So I think those are paramount concerns, and thank you for your professionalism and judgment with respect to this particular situation.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any other questions or comments for Chief or his team? All right. I just want to acknowledge the Kane Street Clinic, and especially since we're on the back end, hopefully, of the pandemic. It's really happy to read the number of vaccinations in terms of where we began to where we are right now. So just happy to see that we are making great strides and progress, especially from when I had mentioned before when we started out here, like March 5th, 2020, we were gearing up for everything that was about to come. So it's just really happy to see, even though we've experienced such a loss and such tragedy, that, it's spring and it's summer, things are blooming, everything is turning green, that we can see these numbers really come down and just know that so many people are benefiting from these clinics and getting vaccinated. So again, huge kudos and praise go out to this entire public safety team, you know, fire and PD, because really without the heavy lift that you all have provided to this town, unfortunately, we would have seen much larger numbers and unfortunately, you know, greater tragedy. So again, you know, a lot of times you come to work, you do your job because this is what you want to do, but not that very often that you get the praises that you all deserve. And so I just want to, you know, continue to recognize your efforts and sing your praises, not only to your leadership team, but also to your rank and file. So just continue to do the good work that you do every single day, 24 hours a day. All right, so we'll move to our next agenda item, which is Chief Riddick.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Chief Riddick of the Police Department. I will attempt to be brief. First, let me commend my colleague, Chief Priest and his team. That was an excellent summary of over 150 plus pages of a document. It was concise, to the point, and I commend you. And I also appreciate your utilization of PowerPoint. You're very talented with all the extra time you have in the fire department. I'm sorry. But anyways, it was very good. Very, very nice. So as part of our action plan, which you may or may not have an opportunity to take a look at, the only addition that we have is we were finally able to return our rifles. I think it was over 19 rifles we submitted back to the military back on May 5th. So we are no longer in possession of those. Secondly, I really thank those of you who reached out to me and the police department via text or phone call, attended the wake of Sergeant Tyler or the funeral. For those of you who did not go unnoticed, and it was greatly appreciated. You know, it was a very difficult time for our police department, for me personally, and many, many others. You know, law enforcement cancer death really touched home, and to have the outpouring of support from the FD, particularly, was there right from the beginning. So I thank you for that flag. When you go to these police funerals or these fire funerals, and to see that American flag stretched out in representation and respect, you just appreciate it. And as I conveyed it to the chief already and to his team, it's deeply touching to us. And thank you, because you didn't have to do that, but you did. I can also tell you it was very much appreciated by Chris's family. You know, rave reviews and thanks to the entire town for everything that we did for Chris and his family. So, you know, God bless you all, and may be blessed for your kindness and compassion and empathy. Thank you. Some quick, you know, data points and some staffing information. As you remember, earlier in 2021, we had mentioned that we had 22 officers eligible for retire. So thus far this year, 11 have retired. I just got notified last week that Captain Peruccio intends on retiring by the end of this month, June 30th. That will be number 12. You know, these things happen. We're still hoping that we'll have some retention. You know, part of our looking forward and as far as people who are going to stay as a result of some of the changes in the contract, we're hoping between 5 and 8 out of that 22. So I think we're tracking somewhere around there. And so that would be success to us. If you recall, we also started a partnership through the mayor's connections with Interville House. That's been very positive and productive. We're still getting used to that relationship, our personnel, and utilizing that. But it should say, good information is we had 41 lethality screenings, and those assessments is a point system that our officers use in domestic violence cases. And when you hit a certain threshold, there's a requirement to contact some type of emergency services and help and resources for the victim of domestic violence. So we had 41 of those. 19 of those are considered high risk, and out of those 19, 5 were immediately placed in some type of shelter or care. So that's becoming very, very beneficial. It's an excellent resource to our public and those victims. Just a sneak peek to our pistol permit applications and our temporary permits that we have signed. Over the years, there's been a dramatic increase. For example, in 2018, we had a total of 172 pistol permit applications and signatures for temporary permits. 2019, 183 for a 6% increase. And from 2019 to 2020, that went to 235 for a 28% increase. And hold on to your hats, but through May of this year, we're already at 153 through May of this year. So we are trending to probably over 300 or so plus. So again, we have many theories and thoughts on that, but just FYI, what's going on. Our year-to-date crime comparison, our Part 1 crime, as a reminder, Part 1 crime includes murder, sexual assaults, robbery, aggravated assault, burglaries, larcenies, auto thefts, thefts from building. We're down 15% when compared to last year. So kudos to the members of the police department and their work and their efforts, as well as the cooperation we're having with the community in keeping their homes and cars locked and secured. And another FYI, I have to be careful here in my soapbox just a little bit, but as far as unfunded mandates, we had the police accountability bill. As a result of that, we've had 31 drug tests. Thankfully, no one has failed with the drug tests. We have 10 more scheduled for tomorrow for a total of 41, and that will cost us $10,250. That was not budgeted for. We had to secure that money out of our training line item. And we've gone through 10 psychological exams thus far for health and wellness checks, and another 5 that are scheduled for this Friday. For that cost would be an additional $3,700. So that concludes my report. A brief understanding in advance that the FD was going to take a large portion of tonight's meeting, and I'm more than willing to answer any questions through you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Riddick. Any questions for Chief Riddick? Chief Riddick, I got a quick question for you. In terms of the drug test, are those unannounced, or does the team have an idea when those are going to be done?
Through you, Madam Chair, Chief Riddick, people are notified approximately about a week in advance. Sometimes a week earlier, sometimes a couple of days in advance, but they're not random drug testing. That is not the case. That is not the case.
All right.
And just for the edification, a random drug test would be you just come into work and tag you're it. That would be a random drug test.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. All right. So we have Mr. Hart for the town manager staff report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Just a couple of things. Number one, I'd like to thank the staff team for the excellent presentation tonight, Chief Priest in particular, as well as the valuable information that Chief Riddick has provided. I also wanted to let you know that we're continuing to work on our panhandling initiative. That's a very good collaborative effort between social services, the police department, and Corporation Counsel's office. And we will be coming back to you at your next meeting with a couple of things. The staff is looking to convene a regional roundtable. Recall they discussed that, meeting with their colleagues across the region sometime in July. We'll also be bringing a draft ordinance to you for your consideration at your next meeting, as well as our plans with respect to signage and education. So that effort continues to move, and we'll be prepared to discuss it in more detail at your next meeting. And then secondly, I'd like to add to Chief Riddick's comments. I'd like to thank everyone who helped support the family of Sergeant Christopher Tyler. I found the funeral services this past weekend to be quite moving. Would like to thank the members of the police department as well as the fire department who participated in that, who planned the event. Was very, very thoughtful, very caring, very supportive, and as the chief said, certainly very meaningful to Sergeant Tyler's family and those close to him, and hopefully offered them as well as Sergeant Tyler's coworkers with just a small sense of closure and the ability to move on, but never ever to forget his legacy, the powerful legacy that he left behind. That concludes my report, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank you and your colleagues for your time and attention this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. And then I'd like to ask if there are any future agenda items that anybody would like to see on our next agenda. All right, so seeing none, before I adjourn, I would just like to also just comment on the loss of the PD, but the entire town. I'm sure that particular officer, I understand he was so well liked by everybody. And I know that the loss is going to be felt for a long time to come. So, you know, it's the grieving process is a slow process. And so we just have to embrace one another and keep the family, you all as the PD family, as well as his family, in your thoughts and prayers. So with that, I will say good night, and I'll adjourn the meeting and continue to stay safe and stay healthy.